He came from the sea, on a ship made of feathers, with skin lighter than night, and with a beard that no tribe of Mesoamerica possessed. He taught humans astronomy, calendars, morality, and promised to return. Who was he? A god? A legend? Or perhaps one who came from the sky? At the center of Aztec and Mayan mythology stands Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent that bridges heaven and earth. But some descriptions of this deity bear a strange resemblance to a celestial visitor or ancient teacher. This image is not unique. Similar stories exist among the Maya, Incas, Egyptians, and Sumerians. Today, we are not simply discussing a myth. We are examining a possible encounter between humanity and something or someone we have never fully understood. Who was Quetzalcoatl? A god? A humanoid teacher? Or a messenger from the stars? The answers may challenge everything we thought we knew about our past. The origins of Quetzalcoatl trace back to the Toltecs around the 10th century. His name means feathered serpent, a symbol of spiritual flight, combining the earthbound serpent with the celestial bird. This duality would define his essence throughout centuries of Mesoamerican worship. The Toltecs, master builders and astronomers, elevated Quetzalcoatl from a simple nature deity to something far more complex and profound. In Toltec mythology, Quetzalcoatl was not merely a god but a teacher, a bringer of knowledge, and crucially, an opponent of human sacrifice. This last characteristic would set him apart from virtually every other deity in the bloodthirsty pantheon of Mesoamerican religions. While other gods demanded hearts torn from living chests, Quetzalcoatl advocated for offerings of flowers, butterflies, and jade. This philosophical stance would later create the very conflicts that led to his departure from the mortal realm. The Toltec priest king Suacatl, who ruled from 947 to 999 CE, adopted the name Quetzalcoatl and embodied the god's teachings. Under his reign, the Toltec capital of Tallinn became a center of learning and artistic achievement. The king abolished human sacrifice, promoted peace, and encouraged the worship of Quetzalcoatl as the supreme deity. However, this golden age would not last. Rival priests, devoted to the god Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror and deity of conflict, grew increasingly hostile to Quetzalcoatl's peaceful doctrine. The Maya incorporated Quetzalcoatl into their pantheon as Kukulkan, maintaining many of the same attributes. He remained the god of learning, the calendar, and the wind. Maya codices depict him as a bearded figure with fair skin, often shown emerging from the mouth of a serpent or descending from the sky. The Maya associated him with the planet Venus in both its morning and evening star aspects, recognizing the cyclical nature of Venus's appearances as symbolic of death and rebirth. When the Aztecs rose to power in the Valley of Mexico, they inherited Quetzalcoatl from their predecessors but transformed him into something even more significant. To the Aztecs, Quetzalcoatl became the god of the morning star, wind, and learning. He was credited with creating humanity by mixing his blood with bones stolen from the underworld. More importantly, he was said to have given humans the gift of corn, the calendar, and writing. The Aztecs believed he had created the fifth sun, the current age of the world, and that he would return to judge humanity when that age ended. The Aztec version of Quetzalcoatl's story became increasingly detailed and specific. According to their myths, he appeared as a tall, bearded man with white skin, unlike any indigenous person of the Americas. He wore robes and carried a staff, teaching the arts of civilization to primitive peoples. He showed them how to cultivate corn, weave textiles, work with precious metals, and create beautiful pottery. He taught them astronomy, mathematics, and the sacred calendar. Most remarkably, he strictly forbade human sacrifice, insisting that the gods preferred offerings of flowers, incense, and personal devotion. The Aztecs believed that Quetzalcoatl had ruled as a priest-king in the legendary city of Tallinn, which they identified with the historical Toltec capital. During his reign, corn grew so abundantly that single ears were too large for a person to carry. Cotton grew naturally in multiple colors, eliminating the need for dyes. Precious stones and metals were as common as pebbles. Disease and aging were unknown. This was truly a golden age of peace and prosperity. However, this paradise was not to last. The war god Tezcatlipoca, jealous of Quetzalcoatl's influence and opposed to his peaceful philosophy, devised a plan to destroy him. Through trickery and deception, Tezcatlipoca got Quetzalcoatl drunk on pulque, the fermented agave beverage. In his intoxicated state, Quetzalcoatl committed acts that violated his own moral code. Some versions say he became intimate with his sister, others that he simply behaved in an undignified manner. Regardless of the specific transgression, Quetzalcoatl awoke filled with shame and remorse. Unable to bear the weight of his actions, Quetzalcoatl decided to leave the mortal realm. He gathered his followers and began a journey eastward toward the sea. Along the way, he stopped at various locations, each of which became sacred sites associated with his passage. At some places, he left behind gifts of knowledge. At others, he performed miracles or made prophecies about the future. The various accounts of Quetzalcoatl's departure differ in their details, but they share common elements that have puzzled scholars for centuries. In some versions, he reaches the eastern shore and builds a raft made of serpent skins, sailing away across the Gulf of Mexico toward the rising sun. In others, he constructs a ship made of feathers and disappears beyond the horizon. Most intriguingly, some accounts describe him boarding a fire ship that carries him up into the sky, where he becomes the morning star. Before his departure, Quetzalcoatl made a promise that would echo through centuries of Mesoamerican history. He vowed to return in the year Suacatl 1 Reed, which occurred every 52 years in the Aztec calendar cycle. When he returned, he would reclaim his rightful place as ruler and usher in a new golden age. This prophecy became deeply embedded in Aztec consciousness, creating a messianic expectation that would have profound historical consequences. The physical descriptions of Quetzalcoatl present some of the most puzzling aspects of his legend. Unlike any indigenous deity of the Americas, he was consistently described as having fair skin, often specifically mentioned as being white or pale. He was bearded, a feature virtually unknown among Native American populations before European contact. He was tall and imposing, with some accounts describing him as a giant. His clothing was said to be made of unknown materials, and he was often depicted wearing a conical hat or headdress that covered his head. These physical characteristics were so unusual for pre-Columbian America that they raise obvious questions about their origin. The absence of facial hair among Native Americans is well documented, making the consistent description of Quetzalcoatl's beard particularly striking. Similarly, the pale skin described in the myths contrasts sharply with the darker complexions of Mesoamerican peoples. The technological aspects of Quetzalcoatl's legend are equally puzzling. He was said to have arrived on a feathered ship that moved without sails or oars. Some descriptions suggest this vessel could fly through the air as easily as sail across water. The fire ship mentioned in some departure accounts has been interpreted by various scholars as everything from a metaphor for the planet Venus to a description of some form of advanced technology. Quetzalcoatl's teachings also included knowledge that seems advanced for its time. He was credited with teaching the complex mathematics necessary for accurate astronomical calculations. The Mesoamerican calendar systems attributed to him were remarkably sophisticated, incorporating cycles within cycles that allowed for precise predictions of celestial events. His knowledge of agriculture included techniques for improving crop yields and developing new varieties of plants. The architectural achievements associated with Quetzalcoatl are equally impressive. The Great Pyramid of Cholula, dedicated to him, remains one of the largest structures ever built by humans. The engineering required to construct such monuments without metal tools, wheels, or draft animals suggests a level of knowledge that historians struggle to explain using conventional models of technological development. The cult of Quetzalcoatl's return became central to Aztec religion and political ideology. Temples were built in his honor throughout the empire, and priests maintained careful calculations of when his promised return might occur. The year Suacatl came and went repeatedly, but the faithful continued to believe that eventually, their god would fulfill his promise. This expectation reached its climax in 1519, when Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés arrived on the shores of Mexico. The timing was significant. 1519 was a Suacatl year, precisely when Quetzalcoatl had promised to return. The physical appearance of Cortez and his men seemed to match the ancient descriptions remarkably well. They were pale-skinned and bearded. They arrived from the east across the sea, and they possessed technologies that seemed magical to the Aztecs. Emperor Moctezuma II, upon receiving reports of the Spanish arrival, initially believed that Quetzalcoatl had indeed returned. The emperor sent gifts of gold, precious stones, and elaborate featherwork to welcome the god. When Cortez and his men were brought to Tenochtitlan, they were received with the honor due to returning deities. This case of mistaken identity would prove catastrophic for the Aztec Empire, as it allowed a small force of conquistadors to gain access to the heart of their civilization. The parallels between the Quetzalcoatl legend and the appearance of Europeans were so striking that they cannot be dismissed as mere coincidence. Yet they raise profound questions about the nature of the original myth. Was the description of Quetzalcoatl's appearance based on some ancient contact with pale-skinned, bearded peoples? Or was it a remarkable coincidence that a mythical description happened to match the appearance of the Spanish conquistadors? The complexity of the Quetzalcoatl legend extends beyond physical descriptions to encompass philosophical and theological concepts that seem unusually sophisticated for their supposed time of origin. The idea of a god who opposed human sacrifice was revolutionary in Mesoamerican religion. The concept of a deity who taught morality and emphasized spiritual rather than material offerings was unique in the region. The notion of a god who would return to judge humanity and establish a new age shows parallels to messianic traditions found in other parts of the world. The story of Quetzalcoatl's fall from grace and subsequent departure also follows patterns found in mythologies worldwide. The theme of a culture hero who brings knowledge to humanity but is ultimately rejected or corrupted appears in numerous traditions. The promise of return and eventual judgment is another universal motif. These similarities suggest either a common origin for such myths or a shared psychological need to create stories of this type. The astronomical aspects of the Quetzalcoatl legend add another layer of complexity to interpretation. His association with Venus, the morning star, connects him to one of the most prominent objects in the sky. Venus's cycle of appearance and disappearance, as it alternates between morning and evening star, creates a natural metaphor for death and rebirth. The 52-year cycle of his promised return corresponds to important astronomical periods recognized by Mesoamerican astronomers. However, the specific details of Quetzalcoatl's astronomical knowledge raise questions about how ancient peoples could have acquired such sophisticated understanding. The accuracy of Mesoamerican calendar systems rivals that of modern astronomy. The ability to predict eclipses, planetary positions, and other celestial events with such precision suggests access to observational data accumulated over centuries or even millennia. The technological implications of the Quetzalcoatl legend become even more intriguing when examined in detail. The feathered ship that brought him across the sea has been interpreted in various ways. Some scholars see it as a metaphor for wind-powered vessels, with feathers representing the wind that fills the sails. Others interpret it more literally as a description of an aircraft, with feathers describing the appearance of wings or lifting surfaces. The fire ship that carried Quetzalcoatl into the sky presents even greater interpretive challenges. If taken literally, it describes a vehicle capable of flight, emitting fire or light, and carrying passengers beyond the atmosphere. Such a description seems to anticipate modern rocket technology by centuries. If interpreted metaphorically, it might represent the transformation of Quetzalcoatl into the morning star, with the fire ship being a poetic description of his celestial form. The architectural and engineering knowledge attributed to Quetzalcoatl also raises questions about technological capabilities. The precise stone-cutting techniques used in Mesoamerican construction, the massive scale of some projects, and the sophisticated understanding of structural engineering required to build earthquake-resistant temples all suggest access to advanced knowledge. The ability to move and position enormous stone blocks with apparent ease implies mastery of techniques that are not fully understood even today. The agricultural innovations credited to Quetzalcoatl include not only the cultivation of corn, but also the development of new varieties and the techniques for maximizing yields. The transformation of teosinte, a wild grass, into modern corn required sophisticated understanding of plant genetics and selective breeding. The development of the Three Sisters agricultural system, combining corn, beans, and squash in a symbiotic planting arrangement, demonstrates ecological knowledge that anticipates modern permaculture principles. The mathematical and astronomical knowledge associated with Quetzalcoatl includes concepts that were not rediscovered in Europe until much later. The concept of zero, essential for advanced mathematics, was known to Mesoamerican cultures centuries before it reached Europe. The understanding of planetary cycles, the ability to predict eclipses, and the creation of accurate calendar systems all require mathematical sophistication that challenges conventional timelines of human intellectual development. The medical knowledge attributed to Quetzalcoatl includes understanding of surgical techniques, pharmaceutical applications of plants, and healing practices that were remarkably advanced. Some of these medical traditions continue to be practiced today and are being studied by modern researchers for their therapeutic potential. The preservation and transmission of such knowledge over centuries suggests a systematic approach to medical education that rivals modern medical schools. The metallurgical knowledge associated with Quetzalcoatl includes techniques for working with gold, silver, and copper that produced items of extraordinary beauty and technical sophistication. The ability to create alloys, the understanding of metal properties, and the development of specialized tools all suggest access to advanced metallurgical knowledge. Some artifacts from this period display technical features that are difficult to explain using conventional understanding of pre-Columbian technology. Yet, despite all these remarkable achievements attributed to Quetzalcoatl, the question of his true nature remains unanswered. Was he a historical figure whose accomplishments were later mythologized? Was he a composite character, combining the achievements of multiple individuals into a single legendary figure? Or was he something else entirely, a being whose true nature has been obscured by the limitations of human language and understanding? The first possibility, that Quetzalcoatl was a historical figure whose achievements were later mythologized, has substantial support among mainstream historians. The existence of Toltec rulers who took the name Quetzalcoatl is well documented. The historical Suacatl-Tepiltzin Quetzalcoatl was a real person who ruled the Toltec Empire and promoted the worship of the feathered serpent god. His opposition to human sacrifice and his eventual overthrow by supporters of Tezcatlipoca are recorded in multiple historical sources. This historical explanation accounts for many aspects of the Quetzalcoatl legend. A reformist ruler who opposed traditional religious practices would naturally be seen as divinely inspired by his supporters and as a dangerous heretic by his opponents. His eventual defeat and exile would be remembered as a tragic fall from grace. The promise of return would represent the hope of his supporters that his reforms would eventually be restored. However, the mythological explanation fails to account for several puzzling aspects of the legend. The physical descriptions of Quetzalcoatl as pale-skinned and bearded do not match any known indigenous populations of the Americas. The technological knowledge attributed to him seems to exceed what would be expected from a pre-Columbian ruler. The precision of the astronomical and mathematical systems associated with him suggests access to knowledge that required centuries of accumulated observation and calculation. The second possibility, that Quetzalcoatl represents cultural diffusion from contact with other civilizations, has gained support from researchers who point to similarities between Mesoamerican and Old World cultures. The description of a pale-skinned, bearded teacher arriving by sea bears obvious resemblances to accounts of European or Middle Eastern visitors. The agricultural, astronomical, and architectural knowledge attributed to Quetzalcoatl could have been introduced by visitors from more technologically advanced civilizations. Evidence for pre-Columbian contact between the Americas and the Old World continues to accumulate. The presence of cocaine and nicotine in Egyptian mummies suggests transoceanic contact. As these substances are native only to the Americas, the similarity between certain Mesoamerican and Asian architectural styles suggests possible cultural exchange. The genetic evidence for multiple waves of migration to the Americas indicates that contact between continents was more common than previously believed. The cultural diffusion explanation could account for the anomalous physical descriptions of Quetzalcoatl and the advanced knowledge attributed to him. Visitors from across the Atlantic or Pacific could have brought new technologies, crops, and ideas to Mesoamerica. Their pale skin and beards would have made them memorable to indigenous peoples who lacked these features. Their technological capabilities would have seemed godlike to societies that had not yet developed similar innovations. However, the cultural diffusion explanation also faces significant challenges. The dating of the Quetzalcoatl legend places it well before any confirmed contact between the Americas and the Old World. The specific details of his story, including the promise of return and the association with Venus, seem to be uniquely Mesoamerican in origin. The absence of clear archaeological evidence for pre-Columbian Old World contact in Mexico weakens the case for cultural diffusion. The third possibility, that Quetzalcoatl represents a symbolic or astronomical figure rather than a historical person, has support from the obvious connections between the legend and celestial phenomena. The association of Quetzalcoatl with Venus, the morning star, provides a natural explanation for his cyclical appearances and disappearances. The 52-year cycle of his promised return corresponds to important astronomical periods recognized by Mesoamerican astronomers. The symbolic interpretation suggests that Quetzalcoatl was never intended to be understood as a historical figure, but rather as a personification of astronomical and agricultural cycles. The departure and return of the god would correspond to the changing seasons, the movements of celestial bodies, or the cycles of agricultural productivity. The physical descriptions of the god would be artistic conventions rather than attempts at historical accuracy. This symbolic explanation accounts for the universal aspects of the Quetzalcoatl legend and its parallels with other world mythologies. The archetype of the dying and rising god appears in numerous cultures, suggesting a common psychological or spiritual need to create such stories. The specific details of the Quetzalcoatl legend would be cultural variations on this universal theme. However, the symbolic interpretation struggles to explain the specific and unusual physical descriptions of Quetzalcoatl. Why would a purely symbolic figure be given such distinctive and anomalous characteristics? The pale skin and beard are not typical features of Mesoamerican artistic conventions and seem to serve no obvious symbolic function. The detailed technological knowledge attributed to the god also seems unnecessary for a purely symbolic figure. The fourth possibility, that Quetzalcoatl represents contact with extraterrestrial visitors, has gained attention from researchers who point to similarities between the legend and accounts of contact with advanced beings from other worlds. The description of Quetzalcoatl's arrival in a feathered ship that could travel through both air and water suggests technology beyond conventional understanding. The fire ship that carried him into the sky resembles descriptions of spacecraft from other cultures. The knowledge attributed to Quetzalcoatl, including advanced astronomy, mathematics, and engineering, could represent information provided by visitors from a technologically superior civilization. The promise of return might refer to planned future contact rather than mythological resurrection. The physical descriptions of pale skin and unusual features could represent attempts to describe non-human beings using familiar human characteristics. Support for the extraterrestrial hypothesis comes from similar legends found in cultures worldwide. The ancient Sumerian accounts of the Anunnaki, described as gods who came from the sky to teach humanity, bear striking resemblances to the Quetzalcoatl legend. The Egyptian god Thoth, who taught writing and mathematics, shares many characteristics with Quetzalcoatl. The Hindu accounts of the Vimanas, flying vehicles used by the gods, parallel the descriptions of Quetzalcoatl's skyship. The global distribution of such legends suggests either a common origin or a shared experience that was interpreted differently by various cultures. The consistency of certain details across cultures that had no known contact with each other is particularly intriguing. The description of pale-skinned, bearded teachers who arrive from the sky and provide advanced knowledge appears in too many unrelated cultures to be easily dismissed as coincidence. However, the extraterrestrial hypothesis faces significant challenges from the lack of physical evidence for such contact. Despite decades of searching, no artifacts have been found that clearly demonstrate the presence of advanced non-human technology in pre-Columbian America. The knowledge attributed to Quetzalcoatl, while impressive, can be explained through human ingenuity and long-term cultural development. The physical descriptions of the god could represent artistic conventions or cultural memories of contact with other human populations. The mystery of Quetzalcoatl's true nature deepens when we examine the archaeological evidence associated with his cult. The Great Pyramid of Cholula, dedicated to Quetzalcoatl, remains one of the largest structures ever built by humans. Its construction required moving millions of tons of earth and stone, organizing thousands of workers, and maintaining a complex project over decades or centuries. The precision of its construction and its alignment with celestial phenomena suggest access to advanced architectural and astronomical knowledge. The codices that contain images of Quetzalcoatl provide additional clues to his nature. These painted books, created by skilled scribes using traditional Mesoamerican techniques, show Quetzalcoatl in various forms. Some depictions show him as a bearded human figure wearing elaborate costumes and headdresses. Others show him in his serpent form, with feathers covering his body and emerging from his mouth. Still others show him as a combination of human and serpent features, with a human head and torso but a serpent's tail. The artistic conventions used in these depictions follow traditional Mesoamerican styles, but certain details seem anomalous. The beard, as mentioned earlier, is not typical of indigenous artistic traditions. The clothing and regalia shown in some images include elements that are not found in other Mesoamerican art. Some figures appear to be wearing helmets or headdresses that cover their entire heads, with only their faces visible through openings. Modern analysis of these codices using advanced imaging techniques has revealed details that were not visible to earlier researchers. Some images show what appear to be technological devices or symbols that do not match known Mesoamerican iconography. Others show figures that seem to be wearing fitted garments or armor that differs from traditional Mesoamerican clothing styles. The temples dedicated to Quetzalcoatl also contain architectural features that are difficult to explain using conventional understanding of pre-Columbian construction techniques. The precision of stone cutting and fitting rivals that of modern masonry. The ability to move and position enormous stone blocks suggests access to techniques that are not fully understood even today. The acoustic properties of some chambers suggest sophisticated understanding of sound engineering. Recent discoveries using ground-penetrating radar and other modern archaeological techniques have revealed hidden chambers and passages within structures associated with Quetzalcoatl. Some of these features appear to serve no obvious ceremonial or practical purpose, leading to speculation about their intended function. The complexity of some underground networks suggests a level of planning and engineering that exceeds what would be expected from pre-Columbian civilizations. The astronomical alignments of structures dedicated to Quetzalcoatl demonstrate sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics. The ability to predict eclipses, planetary positions, and other celestial events with such precision suggests access to observational data accumulated over centuries. The mathematical calculations required for such predictions involve concepts that were not rediscovered in Europe until much later. The agricultural innovations attributed to Quetzalcoatl include not only the cultivation of corn, but also the development of sophisticated agricultural systems that maximize productivity while maintaining ecological balance. The Three Sisters system of planting corn, beans, and squash together created a symbiotic relationship that improved soil fertility and increased yields. The development of raised fields and terracing techniques allowed cultivation in areas that would otherwise be unsuitable for agriculture. The medical knowledge associated with Quetzalcoatl includes understanding of surgical techniques, pharmaceutical applications of plants, and healing practices that were remarkably advanced. Some of these medical traditions continue to be practiced today and are being studied by modern researchers for their therapeutic potential. The preservation and transmission of such knowledge over centuries suggests a systematic approach to medical education that rivals modern medical schools. The metallurgical knowledge attributed to Quetzalcoatl includes techniques for working with gold, silver, and copper that produced items of extraordinary beauty and technical sophistication. The ability to create alloys, the understanding of metal properties, and the development of specialized tools all suggest access to advanced metallurgical knowledge. Some artifacts from this period display technical features that are difficult to explain using conventional understanding of pre-Columbian technology. Yet despite all this evidence, the question of Quetzalcoatl's true nature remains unanswered. The physical evidence is impressive but inconclusive. The technological achievements are remarkable but not necessarily beyond human capability. The astronomical knowledge is sophisticated but could have been developed through careful observation over long periods. The agricultural and medical innovations are advanced but represent logical extensions of human ingenuity applied to practical problems. The mystery deepens when we consider the global context of the Quetzalcoatl legend. Similar stories of divine teachers who bring knowledge to humanity appear in cultures worldwide. The Sumerian accounts of the Anunnaki describe beings who came from the sky to teach humanity the arts of civilization. The Egyptian god Thoth was credited with teaching writing, mathematics, and astronomy. The Hindu tradition speaks of the Saptarishis, 7 sages who preserved knowledge through cosmic cycles. The consistency of these legends across cultures that had no known contact with each other is remarkable. The descriptions of pale-skinned, bearded teachers who arrive from the sky and provide advanced knowledge appear in too many unrelated cultures to be easily dismissed as coincidence. Either these stories represent some form of collective human memory or they reflect actual historical events that were later mythologized. The parallels between the Quetzalcoatl legend and the Sumerian accounts of the Anunnaki are particularly striking. Both describe beings who came from the sky to teach humanity. Both credit these beings with providing the knowledge necessary for civilization. Both describe a golden age when these beings ruled over humanity, followed by their departure and promise of return. Both associate these beings with astronomical phenomena and cyclical time. The Egyptian god Thoth shares many characteristics with Quetzalcoatl. Both are associated with writing and mathematics. Both are credited with teaching astronomy and calendar making. Both are described as wise teachers who opposed violence and promoted learning. Both are associated with the underworld and the afterlife. Both are depicted as having animal characteristics combined with human form. The Hindu tradition of the Saptarishis, or 7 sages, also parallels the Quetzalcoatl legend. These beings are described as preserving knowledge through cosmic cycles, teaching humanity during times of ignorance, and returning periodically to restore civilization. Like Quetzalcoatl, they are associated with specific astronomical phenomena and are credited with providing the knowledge necessary for human advancement. The global distribution of such legends suggests either a common origin or a shared experience that was interpreted differently by various cultures. The possibility that these stories represent collective human memory of actual historical events cannot be dismissed entirely. The alternative explanation, that these legends represent universal psychological archetypes, also has merit but fails to account for the specific and consistent details found across cultures. The mystical and esoteric interpretations of the Quetzalcoatl legend add another dimension to our understanding. Indigenous traditions that survived the Spanish conquest often contain elements that were not recorded in the official codices. These oral traditions, passed down through generations of native peoples, sometimes preserve details that were deliberately excluded from written records. According to some of these traditions, Quetzalcoatl was not merely a god or historical figure, but a member of a race of beings who had always existed alongside humanity. These beings were described as teachers and guardians who appeared during times of crisis to guide human development. They were said to possess knowledge of natural laws and cosmic principles that allowed them to perform what appeared to be miracles. The Nahua people, descendants of the Aztecs, maintain traditions about the return of Quetzalcoatl that extend beyond the simple promise of a future appearance. According to these traditions, Quetzalcoatl never truly departed but remains present in the world, waiting for the proper time to reveal himself again. This time of revelation is associated with a period of great change and transformation when humanity will need guidance to navigate a new phase of existence. The parallels between the Quetzalcoatl legend and esoteric traditions from other cultures are remarkable. The Egyptian concept of the Neteru, divine beings who taught humanity and then withdrew to a higher realm, mirrors the Quetzalcoatl story. The Sumerian tradition of the Watchers, beings who observed humanity and occasionally intervened in human affairs, also shares common elements with the feathered serpent legend. The mystical interpretations of these legends often focus on the idea that such beings represent a higher form of consciousness or existence that occasionally manifests in the physical world. From this perspective, Quetzalcoatl would not be an extraterrestrial visitor or a historical figure, but rather a manifestation of divine wisdom that appears when humanity is ready to receive advanced knowledge. The shamanic traditions of Mesoamerica contain additional elements that were not recorded in the official mythologies. According to these traditions, Quetzalcoatl taught not only practical knowledge but also spiritual techniques for expanding consciousness and accessing higher dimensions of reality. The feathered serpent symbolism is interpreted as representing the union of earth and sky, matter and spirit, human and divine. The prophecies associated with Quetzalcoatl's return often include specific details about the conditions that will precede his appearance. These prophecies speak of a time of great turmoil and transformation when the old ways will be challenged and new forms of knowledge will be needed. The return of Quetzalcoatl is associated with the beginning of a new age of human development. The connections between the Quetzalcoatl legend and secret societies or mystery schools have been noted by various researchers. The knowledge attributed to Quetzalcoatl, including advanced astronomy, mathematics, and engineering, suggests the existence of an organized system for preserving and transmitting esoteric knowledge. The symbolism associated with the feathered serpent appears in various forms throughout history, suggesting a continuous tradition that extends beyond Mesoamerican culture. Some researchers have suggested that the Quetzalcoatl legend represents a deliberately encoded message about the nature of reality and human potential. The specific details of the story, including the astronomical associations and the promise of return, are interpreted as containing hidden meanings that can be understood by those who possess the proper keys to interpretation. The possibility that the Quetzalcoatl legend contains information about advanced technology or scientific principles that were later forgotten has been explored by various researchers. The descriptions of the god's abilities and the technological achievements attributed to him suggest access to knowledge that was somehow lost or suppressed. The promise of return might represent the eventual rediscovery of this lost knowledge. The connections between the Quetzalcoatl legend and modern scientific discoveries are sometimes striking. The association of the god with Venus and the understanding of planetary cycles demonstrates knowledge that was not officially rediscovered until the development of modern astronomy. The agricultural and medical innovations attributed to him anticipate modern discoveries in ecology and pharmacology. The architectural and engineering achievements associated with Quetzalcoatl continue to puzzle modern researchers. The precision of stone cutting and fitting, the ability to move enormous blocks, and the sophisticated understanding of structural engineering all suggest access to techniques that are not fully understood even today. The acoustic properties of some structures suggest knowledge of sound engineering that rivals modern capabilities. The question of whether these achievements represent lost human knowledge or evidence of contact with a more advanced civilization remains open. The possibility that human civilization has experienced cycles of advancement and decline, with knowledge being lost and rediscovered periodically, cannot be dismissed entirely. The alternative explanation, that these achievements represent contact with non-human intelligence, also remains a possibility. The image of Quetzalcoatl remains complex and multifaceted. Whether viewed as a god, a historical figure, a cultural memory, or something else entirely, the legend continues to challenge our understanding of human history and potential. The physical descriptions that don't match indigenous populations, the advanced knowledge attributed to him, and the global parallels to his story all suggest that there may be more to the legend than simple mythology. The question of whether Quetzalcoatl represents allegory or actual historical events remains unanswered. The consistency of details across multiple cultures and the specific nature of the knowledge attributed to him suggest that the legend may be based on actual events that were later mythologized. The alternative explanation, that the legend represents universal human archetypes or psychological needs, also has merit but fails to account for the specific and anomalous details. The importance of the Quetzalcoatl legend extends beyond academic interest. The story raises fundamental questions about the nature of human history, the possibility of lost knowledge, and the potential for contact with forms of intelligence beyond our current understanding. Whether the legend represents ancient wisdom, suppressed history, or something else entirely, it continues to inspire research and speculation. The mystery of Quetzalcoatl serves as a mirror reflecting our own limitations and assumptions about the past. The tendency to dismiss anomalous evidence or to force it into conventional explanations may prevent us from recognizing important truths about human history and potential. The legend challenges us to remain open to possibilities that extend beyond our current understanding. Myths may be mirrors of antiquity, sometimes containing our naive attempts to describe the impossible. The Quetzalcoatl legend, with its blend of historical detail and mythological elements, may preserve information about events or beings that we have not yet learned to understand properly. The possibility that our ancestors encountered something or someone beyond their ability to comprehend fully cannot be dismissed entirely. The final question remains, what if Quetzalcoatl truly came from the sky and we have simply misunderstood the nature of his visit? The legend may represent not mythology but misinterpreted history, not fiction but facts filtered through the limitations of language and understanding. The promise of return may not be metaphorical but literal, not symbolic but real. As we continue to explore the mysteries of our past, the legend of Quetzalcoatl stands as a reminder that reality may be stranger than we imagine. The boundaries between myth and history, between possible and impossible, between earthly and cosmic, may be more fluid than we have assumed. The sky serpent's story continues to whisper its secrets, waiting for us to develop the wisdom to understand what it has been trying to tell us all along.